For me, to learn how to improvise and to be able to then use that knowledge to express something, basically as a jazz musician, it's about learning scales, how they relate to chords, and how chords relate to compositions. And they all go together. And basically, what I do as an improviser, and I'm talking essentially about more traditional music that's based on standard song form, which is like, say, 32 bar song form, A, B, A song form. Basically, then what you're doing is you're working off the chords using particular scales, or actually you can use chords in different inversions of the chords to relate and expand upon the melody. And to me, but what you basically are doing is you're telling a story. This is how I see improvisation, as I see it as a nonverbal story. And what is the story about? Well, on some level, I find, again, this is just my personal explanation, it's autobiographical or semi-autobiographical. I mean, you're basically talking about yourself, your view of how you see things or hear things, especially relating to the particular thing that you're playing. And I see it, as I say, more as storytelling or poetry. Other people see improvisation different ways. I know there are people who see improvisation more in terms of a quasi-mathematical system. And I know people who see improvisation, basically, if they would relate it to another field, they would see it as painting or color. So that, in a nutshell, is actually how I would see improvisation, is a form of storytelling.
And could you give an example when you say you see it in an autobiographical way? Maybe you could use one of your tunes, maybe idiosyncratic, and explain where's your story in the improvisation.
Well, I think I don't have to use one of my tunes to necessarily explain that. I think improvisation is autobiographical simply because it's basically expanding upon how you've gone about the process of learning the language, the musical language, so that you can then communicate and create with this language that you've learned. And so in this sense, I see it always as basically very personal and in that sense autobiographical. In terms of idiosyncratic, well, I wrote it, and so in some level it's an abstract of a particular moment in time, in terms of how I was feeling, how I was thinking,
But sorry to interrupt, we heard your last solo on that tune on the radio, and I still try to understand what do you mean by autobiographical when you talk about improvisation. Where in that solo, in that improvisation, is something about your story, or which story did you want to tell?
Well, again, when I say story, music is nonverbal. It's sort of like saying maybe some mathematicians can conceive of mathematics and an art of abstract storytelling too. I don't know. I'm not a mathematician, but in any art form that's nonverbal, if you're relating it to another, if you're trying to express what it means to you using words, you have to think of another terminology to do it. And as I say storytelling, other people say color. In respect to a particular solo, like in idiosyncratic, the reason why, to me at least, and I'm just speaking for myself, every solo that I do is autobiographical, because it comes at a certain moment in time. It comes only from me. It's my experience in music relating to the musicians that I'm playing with at that particular moment. Every moment is different. Every time I would play a solo off that particular tune, it's going to be different, which means it's intimately autobiographical in the sense of it takes a moment of time of my existence and puts it in musical form in relationship to a very specific situation, which is the situation in this case of a recording studio and the musicians who are inspiring me, co-creating with me, and interrelating musically with me.
Is it actually possible for you to explain exactly what happened during the solo when you were in the recording studio with exactly that band a couple of weeks ago? Can you remember it, or is it just sort of blubbers out and it's something from the subconscious?
For one thing, if I was going to really try to remember the particulars of a particular solo, I'd have to listen to the solo and then talk about it and see what I would remember in terms of what I thought the spontaneous things were happening between us. I could say a few short things about that and just in general. Improvisation is one. It's what has been called spontaneous composition, and obviously you're composing with 3 or 4 other people at the same time. So it's quite complex, quite intricate, and a lot of integrated, interrelated things are going on at the same time. With music that I've played before, and this is a piece idiosyncratic, that there have been times in my life that I played that quite a bit. In this particular 3/4 section, which is where I take the solo, there certainly are certain sort of things that I have sort of ingrained within me that I will probably in one form or another put into that solo, no matter who I'm playing with. But the way and the way I put those things in, or how I have positioned them, or such, in terms of emotional impact and structure, depends entirely on the particular moment and the musicians that I'm working with. So, for instance, there's a tendency for that tune and that piece is sort of a B flat minor modal thing, though it doesn't necessarily stay in key. And I tend to also do, at the beginning of the solo, I remember this time I sort of do a very out of time, sort of freeform, rather raucous type of thing over what the rest of the band is doing. And I know I've done that sort of thing before, but every time it's different, and it's also, as I say, you're responding to all the things that are going on. And I know I should respond. Paul is a very perceptive, the piano player, Paul Grabowski, is a very perceptive piano player. And I know I try to listen a lot to what he's doing, and he's always really listening and trying to accompany. And so there's an interaction that's going. And so I know how I phrase has something to do with that. Also, you're listening, hey, with people like Guido and Andy, Guido May and Guido Mai, and Andy Kurtz, the drummer and the bass player. These are also people that are very supportive, and also that you're listening to. There's this interaction that's going on. So everybody has their pet licks. Everybody has learned how to learn the language of improvisation in slightly different ways. So all that goes into play. And so obviously with almost any tune that I would play, there are certain similarities in how I would approach every improvisational moment improvisation that I have done on a particular tune on different days. There will be some similarities, but there also, man, it's such a thing that has to do with the participation of everybody playing and how they interact. And there's so much spontaneous shit that's going on that it's as I say, you're in the moment. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things of music is when you slip out of the moment, that's not good. I mean, the whole point of music is to be continually in the moment. And I personally, at the best moments are you're carried with the music and you're not really thinking as such. You're experiencing the moment. This is how I would put it. Yeah.
Where does it reflect some of your life when you play these licks and feel in the moment and engage with the other people? What is that about your life, about telling a story? Where is a story in your solos?
Okay, if you believe that music is basically an extension of your body knowledge, of your sense of being, then it has to be autobiographical. That's all that can be, and that's what it is. I mean, hey, I'm blowing through an instrument. I have a particular sound. It's not like I'm in a classical orchestra and I'm trying to sound exactly like everybody else, and I'm playing a part which needs to be played in a very specific way. I mean, that's not what I'm doing. Then it's not autobiographical. Your sound is hopefully rather, I won't say indistinguishable because classical music has changed over the years too, but it needs to blend in with the other instruments in a way that you have a group sound. And with the kind of jazz that I play, actually it's all about me as an individual. And if you're saying that improvisation is your expression of yourself as an individual, it can only be autobiographical. What else can it be? What else can music be other than basically how you relate? As I say, for me, it's relating to the moment, but in that relating to the moment, all your experience, all the years that you've been involved, and supposedly, and you hope that this process, musical process of using sound as a method of expressing yourself, of creating, says something about not only the moment that's occurring, but also all the moments that went before, in a sense. I mean, the particular way that I choose to play at a spontaneous given moment in an improvisation is affected by everything that I've done before. And I mean, that's what the beautiful thing about a creative art is basically it's a way of expressing your individual view of life. And when I say view of life, we're all using symbolic terms, but in a sense, aren't we as artists trying to use symbols to get away from symbols in a funny way? I mean, you're trying to. I mean, that's what music for me is too. Is it's going beyond symbols to get to some kind of maybe subjective reality.
What would you call, and I hear you sometimes calling it that way. Oh, this was not a good solo. This was a bad solo. Oh, this was a great solo. So what makes a good improvisation a good solo, and what makes a bad one?
Okay, on some level, music and the perception of music is very subjective. So that's the first thing I would say. Sometimes when I thought I haven't played well, I suspect that there are probably people who thought I played well and that they got something from it. And vice versa. When I thought I played great, I'm sure there are people who thought, God, he sounds terrible. So that's the first thing I'd say. But then the second thing I'd say, there's certain technical aspects of music. Such as articulations, such as intonation, being in tune, the ability to project the ideas that you have using the technical ability that you have. And when these things start to fail, it means that you are not able to project the particular ideas that you're having, and for me, that means that you're failing. I mean, there's no perfection in any of this, as far as I'm concerned. But still, there is this idea of attaining a certain level where you feel you've gotten across what you wanted to get across at the moment. And when I feel that I haven't done that, I feel that I've done a bad solo. And obviously, when I am having problems articulating ideas, musical ideas, it's for me frustrating. But doesn't mean that it necessarily always is bad in terms of an objective way, because you can have, the struggle with an instrument or the struggle with ideas sometimes can bring beautiful tensions into music. And sometimes just this struggle and the difficulties can produce some very, very fascinating musical moments. So, as I say, I think this idea of being dissatisfied with what you're doing is I think a healthy one, can be a healthy attitude, because when you are really satisfied, then what's next? But there is also this basic idea that there are certain minimum necessities of being able to get out a creative idea, where you need a certain amount of technical abilities, and when these start to falter, that for me is when I'm very dissatisfied.
Musicians, and probably it happened to you too, lose some of their physical power when they get older, especially when you play a brass instrument. How does that affect your play? How do you integrate it in your play? How do you deal with it?
I find personally it's not so much like a problem of losing physical power. I'm 71, but I'm still in good shape. I can, in terms of my endurance and such, or being able to bike 50 Ks or do this or do that, it hasn't really changed much. So I feel that it's not a question of power. I think it's more a question of, for me personally, I find that I have more problems with my embouchure. In Deutsch Umsatz. Ansatz. Okay. Anyway, yeah. And that's not a question of power or endurance. Those are some other physiological, psychological problems that aren't so easy to overcome or figure out exactly how to deal with. It's hard for me, the idea of, okay, I can't play as loud as I played, or with as much power, or with as much strength as I used to play, isn't at this point a problem for me. So that question is sort of still theoretical. In the next few years, it probably won't if I'm still playing. But for me, the big question is much more a question of okay, the problems which also I think happen with some brass players or horn players who have been playing for 50 years, which I have been, which is you develop certain idiosyncrasies which are harmful to the way that you play, and these over a period of years may develop, and then you have to all at once deal with them. And I think more of my difficulties come from that.
How does this kind of restriction influence and maybe even helps your music, or do you only see it as some kind of enemy?
Actually, I see it as a very negative aspect of the music, and more of an enemy. And actually, probably that's not a good idea. I think when you start having problems, I'm at the point where I'm just because we just did a thing, and there's some very nice stuff about. We did a radio date in Nuremberg, and then we did a recording which I haven't really 2 days in the studio, which I haven't really listened to yet. But I listened to the Nuremberg recordings, which were broadcast a few days ago, and they sound really good, especially considering that this band was together for such an incredibly short time. I mean, it's some very nice music, and I can sort of live with what I do. I mean, the band itself, supports me in a way that somehow it works, but so I'm in this juncture of my life where I have to contemplate. Do I want to continue, or do I not want to continue? And there are reasons on both sides. But if I am going to continue, I think the idea of looking at my problems with my embouchure as a negative thing is probably not a good idea. I think you can't look at things as being bad for you. I think you have to have a different mentality. So, I'm going through a process of, okay, do I start rethinking my approach to how I play? And that's the big one.